Welcome into One of One Sports, the only one for your original sports commentary and analysis. Week one of college football is in the books, so it's time to give our official Week One top 10. Let's get into it. All right, so there were a ton of great Week One games, and we're going to talk about the teams that were the most impressive. But first, we got to give a few honorable mentions. The first are the three big losers of the big games this weekend. So that was Clemson, that was Texas, and that was Notre Dame. All were really competitive. So starting on the Texas front, you lost by 7 points, but it was a home game, a game you thought I'd win, and your quarterback and your offense played really poorly. Do I think they're still probably better than some teams I have on this list and potentially a top 10 team? Yes, I do. Same thing with Clemson, who lost in a similar type of scenario, only putting up 10 points. Your offense was disappointing, and you lost a home game. So both those teams, though I think are still really talented, a ton of potential, I couldn't put them in the top 10 after starting off with disappointing performances and being, winless on the season, despite it only being week one. Then the other team, Notre Dame, a little bit different since you were closer score and on the road. But like I said, it felt weird to put teams without a win in the top 10. Once they get a few more wins under the belt, they can move back in here. But for now, they're not going to be included. And then the other two schools were from the SEC. That is Auburn, who I was really impressed with, winning 38-24 from Baylor. Just barely missed out. And that was mostly because the defense, a little bit suspect, had trouble dealing with Baylor's weapons like Josh Cameron, Michael Trigg, and I didn't see enough of a passing attack, which is one of the things I was most looking forward to for Auburn this year with those great receivers they have. Jackson Arnold looked much more dangerous on the ground than with his arm, so that was just barely keeping them out. And then Tennessee with new quarterback Joey Aguilar. The offense looked really dynamic, and they were the first team cut from this list, just barely behind. Number 10, Iowa State. So the Cyclones are the only team on this list that's actually 2-0, playing that week zero game in Ireland, which is the main reason they're on here. Now, Kansas State had a down week again. Well, maybe they're just not very good, but I think Kansas State is a team that is pretty good, looked good in Ireland, of course sloppy in a week zero game, and then struggled to beat North Dakota, but I still think they're a quality opponent, and Iowa State was able to beat them at a neutral site as a really good win. And while Kansas State, I feel like, had a bit of a hangover from, the Ireland trip, Iowa State was able to come out against a team, an FCS school that sure you're supposed to beat them, but they absolutely destroyed them. I think it was like 55-7 if I'm remembering the score right. I think Rocco Becht has looked really good. I think the O-line and the running game looks pretty solid, and the receivers have been better than I expected after losing Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. And that's not to mention that the defense, especially against Kansas State, looked really good, and they look like a team that once again could be in the Big 12 championship. Matt Campbell looks to have another really good Cyclone team in 2025. They come in at number 10. At number 9, I have the TCU Horned Frogs, who just last night absolutely crushed Bill Belichick in North Carolina in his debut. And this was a game a lot of people were really excited for. And of course, all the talking points were about Bill Belichick, the greatest coach in NFL history, arguably, coming into college football to take over North Carolina. And that is not what the talking point is going to be coming out of it. Sure, people talk about how bad North Carolina was, but to me, it was about TCU making a statement on a Bill Belichick-led defense to run the ball as well as they did and to look as dynamic as they did passing. Jordan Dwyer seemed to have no trouble transferring his skill set from Idaho in the FCS level to power football, and you add that with Eric McAllister. I'm confident in this receiving corps. I'm confident in Josh Hoover to be one of the better quarterbacks in the country. Like I said, the run game looked good, and you got 2 defensive touchdowns, kind of reaffirming what I thought going into the season, that TCU could be one of the better defenses in the Big 12. And yeah, we start off with 2 Big 12 teams in our top 10. Spoiler alert, we're not done yet. At number 8, I have the Florida State Seminoles, and this is one of the one where it's hard to balance preseason expectations versus the data we got in week 1. Because on one hand, I thought Alabama was easily going to beat Florida State. So Florida State way surpassed my expectations, and Alabama was a team I predicted to be in the college football playoff. I didn't release a preseason poll, but if I did, would have been in the top 10, probably around this range here, around 8. And Florida State was a team that, though I thought they'd make a bowl game, I think I picked the 7-5 season. Definitely wasn't a team that was going to be in my preseason top 25. Now, after 1 week, Florida State clearly looked like the better team. The rushing attack was really good. Thomas Castellanos was great on the ground, and the defense looked pretty solid. But this is where it comes into balance with the eye test, because looking at Alabama, they looked just not good. Like, part of it was taken away from the impressiveness of Florida State because of how bad Alabama looked at times. Now, you'd see the flashes of the talent, and Journey Bernard was great, and they'd have some defensive plays, but the overall body of work, there wasn't enough consistency, and there'd be so many plays where the defense just looked slow or lethargic, or Ryan Williams looked weird out there, or Ty Simpson didn't seem to know what he was doing at certain points, and it just seemed to be a team that wasn't ready to go in week one, which did somewhat deflate the impact of the win for Florida State, because personally, I think it had a little bit more to do with Alabama just not living up to what I thought they were going to be. With that being said, it's still a double digit or, yeah, 2 touchdown win over a power football team that is definitely still going to be above average. Like, there's no doubt for me that Alabama is still going to be a good team. So getting that win in week one, still very impressive. And they did it in fairly dominant fashion. So the Seminoles come in at number 8. Coming in at number 7, continuing the Big 12's run of dominance early in my top 10 is the Utah Utes, who I think were one of the most impressive teams in the country on Saturday night, absolutely crushing old Pac-12 opponent, now Big 12 opponent, UCLA on the road in the Rose Bowl, I believe 43-10. And I had high expectations for this Utah team. I thought they had a great O-line led by Spencer Fano. I think Devon Dampier is one of the best running quarterbacks in college football, and Wayshawn Parker looked to be a good back as well. But what I saw in terms of how dominant the O-line was still surprised me a little bit, and Devon Dampier was even better rushing than I expected. He looked like he was still playing against high school players, and I say that because I watched him absolutely destroy my high school team in the state semifinals with him just dodging tackles left and right, and it looked like he was still versing high school players. He's so elusive at times, but he also surprised me with how good he looked throwing the ball, and that's really what put me over the edge for Utah to be ahead of some of these other Big 12 schools like TCU and Iowa State, because the ground game looks lethal, and I know how good the coaching is, but when you have a quarterback like Devon Dampier who can do it on the ground and in the air, I know it's early, but already sort of like a dark horse Heisman I'm looking at. He just looks so good, and that's what moved the needle for them to be over, a team like TCU was also really impressive. And then number 6, and this is kind of where we get a differentiator in terms of 7, 8, 9, and 10 were teams that had big wins so far in the season. Maybe aren't, schools you think of as who do I think are the top 10 teams of the country, but because this is about earning it, not about, preseason expectations, they've been here. At number 6, we get one of those teams that hasn't done it yet, only beating Marshall in dominant fashion, but they did what they had to. And because of the brand and the preseason expectations and the roster evaluation, I do put Georgia here. Now, if they'd been close against Marshall, they wouldn't be here. But because they were dominant, did what they expected to do, I'm still going to give them the credit of being one of the most talented teams in the country who recruits at the highest level, who improved at the wide receiver position, and has what I would say is the best coach in the country in Kirby Smart. You put that together, Georgia is going to be a really good team. I picked them to go to the SEC championship before the season. I still think, well, obviously it's been 1 week and they won their game. I still believe in them to do that, and I do think they may be the best team in the SEC this year, seeing what happened to Alabama, seeing what happened to Texas. There's another school we'll talk about coming up that'll challenge them, and I'm sure other competitors will arise, but right now Georgia looks to be in great position. They round out 6 through 10. Now moving into the top 5, we continue with a similar theme of what was Georgia, and that is Penn State, who had a dominant win over Nevada. And again, it's about pretty much what I thought coming into the season, right? I still think Drew Aller is a really good quarterback. I still think they have the best running back duo in college football. I still think they improved at wide receiver position. They have a great defense, and Jim Knowles is a good hire. And this seems to be the year for James Franklin. All that is still there. I would have had them above Georgia coming into the year, still do, and it's pretty much the same story of what I expect from Penn State going forward. Sure, a lot of teams probably could have beaten up on Nevada, and this is a little bit of a benefit of doubt just on paper what it looked like coming into the season. But nevertheless, I still had, if I had to pick Penn State versus those teams down at the bottom, I'm still picking Penn State, and those other teams like a TCU, Utah, will have to do more to move ahead of Penn State in my mind. So the Nittany Lions stay at 5. And then at 4, the last of these kind of, preseason expectations is Oregon Ducks. But this was a little bit of, being impressed from week 1. I know it was just Montana State and FCS school, but they're a good program. They lost a lot, but still a well-coached, well-run FCS program. One of the better, in fact, behind North Dakota State only probably. And Dante Moore looked incredible. The receivers looked pretty good. Again, it's just FCS competition. But everything from Oregon looked to be where it needed to be. And you compare that to last year where they opened up against Idaho, only won like 24-14, really struggled, came out flat. That was not the case this year. They look much more ready to go from the jump in week 1. So Oregon comes in at number 4. Now moving into the top three, and you can probably guess who they are. They are the three teams who had AP top 10 wins this week. And we'll start off with Miami. Of the three teams upcoming, I won't say the team names, although I'm sure you already know it by now. Miami had the smallest margin of victory, only winning by 3, but still a very good win. And takeaways for Miami to look, positively towards the future for the season. The secondary already looked so much improved from last season. Only had one major busted coverage. Now it was a major one, but last year, if they could have just had one a game, they would have definitely been in the college football playoff. The receivers also looked really good, which was a concern, losing your last year's top 6 receivers. C.J. Daniels as an early catch of the year contender with that one-handed catch. And the O-line and run game looked like what it was expected to be. The D-line looked good. Ruben Bain was solid. And Carson Beck looked healthy. This looks right now, with Clemson going down, maybe Florida State emerges, maybe someone else. But right now, looks like the top team in the ACC based off week 1. Now at number 2, it is the Ohio State Buckeyes. Obviously, there's a major case for number 1. You took down the team. The AP had number 1. I would have had number 1, and you beat them by a touchdown. I picked them to beat you. You surprised me. You impressed me. The defense was great. That goal line stand looked just like last year's team. And now part of this I do think was like Texas looked not good at all, especially offensively in terms of play calling, in terms of how Arch Manning looked. The receivers didn't seem to get the most separation, but you have to give credit to Ohio State's defense, which I did doubt, bringing an entire new defensive front, a new defensive coordinator. So that was impressive. But also the offense didn't look great. Now, given it was going up against a Texas defense that I think could be elite, Jeremiah Smith had some drops, Max Clare had a drop, but Julian Sayin overall looked like a pretty solid game, especially for your first start against a team as good as Texas. And they were maybe the best team in week 1, but LSU is the team I have to go with for number 1 because they also beat a top team by a touchdown, but LSU did it on the road and in slightly more impressive fashion to me. Comparing the victories, like I said, Texas seemed a little bit more self-inflicted with how bad Arch Manning was and how bad the offense was. Clemson certainly had offensive struggles as well, but I didn't think it was quite to the degree Texas had and seemed a little bit more forced by LSU. And LSU overall, like I said, winning on the road, slightly more impressive than winning at home. Harder thing to do in college football against two teams, Clemson and Texas, that I both would have had preseason top 5. So similar level of victory by the same amount. One on the road, you give the nod there to LSU. I also think Garrett Nussmeier looked really impressive. The weapons on the outside looked really impressive. And even with a few calls going against them, like maybe that could have been a catch for a touchdown and certain things like that, they still managed to come out on top and were dominant in the second half. Whereas Ohio State built the lead early, but Texas outplayed them in the second half for large stretches, but you made crucial plays. I liked LSU seeming to improve over the course of the game, looking better in the second half, and that's why I'm going with them at the number 1 spot. With that being said, that's all I have for today's video. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Help us reach 200 subscribers and comment who is your top 10 from week 1 in college football. Looking forward to week 2. Until next time.